Good evening, everyone. My name is Mishka Ligot, and I'd like to welcome all of you watching from the comfort and safety of your respective homes to the first installment, no, not the first installment, actually, to the reading the script, to the, I would say, fourth installment of Wisconsin Wednesdays featuring poets Traci Brimhall and Lauren Russell. Traci and Lauren will be reading from their new books, Come the Slumberless to the Land of Nod, published by Copper Canyon, and Descent from Tarpaulin Sky Press, respectively. Our next event will be on Wednesday, November 11, and will feature Amy Nezukumantatil with her new book, World of Wonders. Wisconsin Wednesdays is an online reading series brought to you by the UW-Madison program in creative writing and the Wisconsin Book Festival. In light of the current health crisis, Wisconsin Wednesdays was designed to continue with the program and foundation's practice of hosting brilliant writers, many of them alumni of the program who are currently promoting their new books. Along with rising to the challenge of social distancing measures and the inability to gather in person, we hope that Wisconsin Wednesdays, through its new virtual platform, is also able to carry out the Wisconsin idea, which declares that the borders of the university are also the borders of the state. And so we welcome you, whether you're joining us from here in Madison, Milwaukee, Marshfield, Marinette, Mineral Point, Menominee, Manitowoc, Mequon, or anywhere else in the US, the States, anywhere else in the US or the world. You may also notice that a number of our events are on a Tuesday, but you might also agree with us that Wisconsin Wednesday simply rolls off the tongue in such a smooth and pleasing way, so we're keeping the name. We'd first like to take a moment to thank and promote all our partnering independent bookstores from all over Wisconsin. A Room of One's Own in Madison, the Bookstore in Appleton, the Village Booksmith in Baraboo, Honest Dog Books in Bayfield, Redberry Books in Cable, Inklink Books in East Troy, Daughters Books in Eau Claire, Woodland Pattern in Milwaukee, Foxden Books in River Falls, Arcadia Books in Spring Green, Mind Chimes Bookshop in Three Lakes, and Driftless Books and Music in Viroqua. Please continue to support your local bookstores throughout this pandemic and consider placing an order for Traci and Lauren's books through any of these establishments tonight. Most offer shipping and contactless curbside pickup. You can find their contact information on our webpage, tinyurl.com/whiskweds. That's tinyurl.com/whiskweds. Before we proceed with the reading, we'd also like to recognize that Wisconsin Wednesdays is being broadcasted to you from Tijoc, traditional Ho-Chunk land historically ceded and occupied through unjust legislations and treaties such as the Indian Removal Act of 1830. We recognize the Ho-Chunk as the original and true stewards of this land, and we honor their continued resilience and resistance, along with that of the other 11 First Nations that reside in the areas of this state. Traci is joining us from Kansa and Kickapoo land in Manhattan, Kansas, and Lauren is joining us from East Lansing, Michigan, land of the Anishinaabeg Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples. Finally, in the spirit of resilience and humanity's collective capacity for resourcefulness, we'd like to thank you viewers for your patience with this new online format. Please bear with us should there be any technical issues that may arise during the reading. We'll have some time for some Q&A with the authors after they both read. So please, the box at the bottom of the Crowdcast page, submit any questions that you have for the authors at any time during the reading, and we'll do our best to accommodate your queries later on during the event. And so now I'd like to introduce our first reader, Traci Brimhall. Traci, come on stage, our virtual stage. Traci is the author of 4 books, Rookery, published in 2010 by SIU Press and selected by Michelle Bosu for the 2009 Crab Orchard series. In Poetry First Book Award, Our Lady of the Ruins, published in 2012 through Norton and selected by Caroline Forche for the 2011 Barnard Women's Poets Prize, and Sudaji, published by 2017 through Copper Canyon Press. Her latest collection, Come the Slumberless to the Land of Nod, was published this year through Copper Canyon also. She's also the author of a children's book, Sophia and the Boy Who Fell, illustrated by Sarah Ngui. Traci's poems have appeared in The New Yorker, Poetry, New England Review, Plowshares, Orion, The Believer, The Nation, The New Republic. Her essays have appeared in Georgia Review, The Southern Review, Perry Schooner, Gulf Coast, Coppernickel, and Brevity. She's a recipient of grants and fellowships from the NEA, the University of Mississippi, Breadloaf, Sewanee, and many other institutions. Traci was also the 2008-2009 J.C. and Ruth Hall's Poetry Fellow at the Wisconsin Institute for Creative Writing. She's currently an associate professor and the director of creative writing at Kansas State University. Written during the trial of a close friend's murder, Come the Slumberless to the Land of Nod exposes that the whimsical, horrible, and absurd all sit together. In this ambitious collection, Traci Brimhall corresponds with the urges of life and death within herself as she lives through a series of impossibilities: the sentencing of her friend's murderers, the birth of her child, the death of her mother, a divorce, a trip sailing through the Arctic. In lullaby, lyric essay, and always with brutal sincerity, Brimhall examines how beauty and terror live right alongside each other, much like how Nod is both a fictional dreamscape and the place where Cain is exiled for murdering Abel. By plucking at the tensions between life and death, love and hate, truth and obscurity, Brimhall finds what it is that ties opposing themes together: how love and loss are married in grief. Like Eve thrust from Eden, Brimhall is tasked with finding meaning in a world defined by its cruelty. Unrelenting, incisive, and tender, these poems expose beauty in the grotesque and argue that the effort to be good always outweighs the desire to succumb to what is easy. With poems that, quote, feel as intimate as a handwritten letter, unquote, Come the Slumberless to the Land of Nod, quote, unfurls like a series of dispatches from the shores of grief and the burning wildfire of divorce, writes John Freeman for LitHub. A review from Publishers Weekly reads, through these braided griefs, Brimhall brings an eye to the romance of death and the implications of conflating violence with beauty and eros. Can death be understood through art? The questions posed by this stunning collection will remind readers of their own mortality while reawakening the power and fury within them. And so I'm thrilled she's joining us tonight. Please welcome Traci Brimhall.
Thank you, Mishka. We were just talking before things started about what a difficult year it is, but that also maybe there's some hope. I'll try not to be a total bummer. As was in the introduction, right, a lot of the book deals with difficult things. My friend's murder and the trial for his murderers, my mother's death right after the birth of my son, a divorce, and also let me not say that the birth of a child is entirely the beautiful miracle that we'd like to think it is. Whenever I teach sentimentality to my students, I use the Oscar Wilde quote, it's wanting the luxury of emotion without paying the price. And I think that's true for kids too. And it's always my example that children are a beautiful little miracle, but it takes a lot of blood and screaming to get them here. And that there's a lot of sleepless nights. And once my son even vomited into my mouth. But that's always like my example of sentimentality is like people might think babies are cute and sweet, and they can be for like 10 minutes out of the day. And then the rest of it's really difficult, right? Because love can be really difficult. Love can also be a lot of years of taxes and shared laundry and fight over whose turn it is to take out the trash. And I'm going to start with a love poem, and which also used to begin with another Oscar Wilde quote, who said that without exaggeration, there can be no love. And I love that there's kind of two ways to think about that quote, but also I like that this is part of the spell of love as well, whether it's a short one or an enduring one, that when you look at that person, the exaggeration just comes naturally. Like they are the everything, their voice is music. They are the missing puzzle piece you never knew you needed. And that those corny feelings that are so common that are in all the pop songs, right? It's because there is something lovely and exaggerated and wonderful about it. Though the poem calls itself Love Poem Without a Drop of Hyperbole, because the poem does not believe this is an exaggeration. I love you like ladybugs love windowsills, love you like sperm whales love squid. There's no depth I wouldn't follow you through. I love you like the pawns in chess love aristocratic horses. I'll throw myself in front of a bishop or a queen for you, even a sentient castle. My love is crazy like that. I like that sweet little hothouse mouth you have. I like to kiss you with tongue, with gusto, with socks still on. I love you like a vulture loves the careless deer at the roadside. I want to get all up in you. I love you like Isis loved Osiris, but her devotion came up a few inches short. I'll train my breath and learn to read sonar until I retrieve every lost blood vessel of you. I swear this love is ungodly, not an ounce of suffering in it. Like salmon with its upstream itch, I'll dodge grizzlies for you. Like hawks to skyscraper rooftops, I'll keep coming back, maddened, a little hopeless, embarrassingly in love. And that's why I'm on the couch kissing pictures on my phone instead of calling you in from the kitchen, where you are undoubtedly making dinner too spicy. But when you hold the spoon to my lips and ask if it's ready, I'll say it is. always, but never, there is never enough. I mentioned the joy and pain of having a kid, and how there's ways in which it's like totally special and amazing, but also if anybody wants to be talked out of it, I'll gladly do that. Just give me your number and I'll call. And I tried 1 week or 1 month with my monthly writing group that meets at my kitchen table and now on Zoom, to write a poem about wonder. And I think Mishka's training for one of the most glorious jobs in the world of librarian at the information school. And I just love me a fact. And I love how facts are a form of intimacy with the world. And having a small child, there are so many questions that are, so pressing and interesting. And tonight, even at dinner, my son said, guess what my biggest question is? And I was like, where does the sun go? What happens to us when we die? What is love? And he goes, why is Google called Google? Have you ever thought of that? And so he quite likes himself a question and a fact. And I love watching his brain grow this way and get intimate with the world by asking questions. But I've also had to watch him like grow in other hard ways, right? It's like watching your heart move around outside your body and encounter painful, difficult things. And when I wrote this poem, I only wanted to focus on the joyful things and the beautiful things. And my writing group said, but you're turning away from something that's happening in this stanza and you have to go deeper into it. And I love it if you can find like a good reader or set of reader or friends who remind you to keep asking of your poems, no matter how long you write them, what is true and what is ethical and what do you need to say, rather than just those are some pretty images or those are some cool facts, because it gets really easy to rest on beauty rather than keep digging. So shout out to my writing group and to librarians all over the world. Oh, wonder. It's the garden spider who eats her mistakes at the end of day so she can billow in the lung of night. Dangling from an insecure branch or caught on the coral spur of a dove's foot and sleep, her spinnerets trailing radials like ungathered hair. It's a 1,000,000-pound cumulus. It's the troposphere, holding it, miraculous. It's a mammatus rolling her weight through dusk, waiting to unhook and shake free the hail. Sometimes it's so ordinary it escapes your notice. A pothos reaching for windows, the ease of an avocado slipping its skin. A porcelain boy with lamp-black eyes told me most mammals have the same average number of heartbeats in a lifetime. It is the mouse engine that hums too hot to last. It is the blue whale's slow electricity. 6 pumps per minute is the way to live centuries. I think it's also the hummingbird I saw in a video lifted off a cement floor by firefighters and fed sugar water until she was, again, a tempest. It wasn't when my mother lay on the garage floor and my brother lifted her while I tried to shout louder than her sobs. But it was her heart, a washable ink. It was her dark's genius, how it moaned slow enough to outlive her. It is the orca who pushes her dead calf 1,000 miles before she drops it or it falls apart. And it is also when she plays with her pod the day after. It is the night my son tugs at his pajama collar and cries, "The sad is so big, I can't get it all out." And I behold him, astonished, his sadness as clean and abundant as spring, his thunder heart a marvel I refuse to invade with empathy. And outside, clouds groan like gods. A garden spider consumes her home. It's knowing she can weave it again tomorrow between citrus leaves and earth. It's her chamberless heart, cleaving the length of her body. It is lifting my son into my lap to witness the birth of his grieving. When I got to visit Jessie Lee Kirchhoff's class a couple days ago, I talked about my one-night stands, not like in a TMI Tinder kind of way, but in a poem kind of way that often when I really wanted to write but was really struggling for an idea, I would sit down and write Dear Thanatos, Thanatos being the Greek god of death, and what Freud said was the death drive in us that makes us do things like smoke cigarettes or whatever our self-destructive behavior or behaviors might be. And somehow whenever I wrote to my darkness always showed up with some really weird stuff to say. And so I always found it really easy to just like have a one night stand with my darkness whenever I wanted to write and didn't really have anything I was chewing over or trying to work out, or like a book project that I was sort of, in deep monogamous book love with. Um, these one night stand poems just were happening in between books. And then I realized that they sort of belonged maybe in this book. I said I caught the feelings for my one night stand, and realized that there was something about this like drive towards self-annihilation that was sort of working for me. So that's also, if people want to be writing in the pandemic and are struggling, I find writing to an abstraction sometimes really freeing. When I was drawing to a close with this book, I started writing to Eros, or the love drive, instead. And what came out was totally different and totally chatty. And I also really liked writing those poems as well. So whatever the abstraction is, whether it's like loneliness or joy or gratitude or some other abstraction, I think sometimes like writing to an abstract idea or emotion that sometimes you just start addressing it and it says something back to you if you invite sort of that intimacy to happen. So here's one of the one night stand poems that wasn't, my year in Wisconsin was too long ago for it to be a Wisconsin poem, but it's a Michigan poem. So not even the same time zone, but it's still up there by a lake. Dear Thanatos, it wasn't a dream. I gave birth to a one-eyed angel. His placenta was a fig slick with honey, so I ate it. I nursed him with grapes crushed between my breasts. What can kill you is sacred, so my child was sacred, blonde and vengeful. His ribs said, enter me, and my shadow said yes. He took the silver coins hidden in my mouth and laid me in the tall grass. The stars said, where am I? My dress said, rip. I saw no clouds, but I saw the wind, who only wanted a daughter, and I had none to give. There was the black tongue sliding deeper into the earth. There was his one good eye, open, silvered, my initials carved in the center. So little in me wanted to live. The darkness said, you die whether you risk anything or not. I emptied ashes from my pockets. I crawled to feel the stones cut my knees, God's foot on my throat. The dream said, follow me. The angel said, you're here. So darkness never said anything I understood, but it would show up for me every time I was looking to say something. I want to read this poem called Contender, because I'm hoping it's one of my other like, non-bummer poems in the book. And especially right now, I want to read something that's not a bummer. And also to share before I read, I'm not a horse person. I've never watched a Kentucky Derby in person or on a screen, though I have fed a mint julep. It's overrated. But there's this horse named Secretariat, who is very, very famous racehorse who won the Triple Crown. I know what that is, and I don't even watch horse racing. But Secretariat was a famous horse. And often horses don't have really great grand deaths, but if you win the Triple Crown, they'll bury you whole, which is a special honor for a horse. But they still did a necropsy, Secretariat, and checked everything out and weighed and measured everything before burying him, and found out that Secretariat had a genetically enlarged heart, and that all of the horses of his lineage shared this especially large heart, which was the key to their success. The reason they won so much is because they just had really big hearts. And the line in the poem is actually from the vet who did the necropsy. That's what cut it out when he cut open and saw the heart. Contender. It's all right to overdress for the riot. Your rage is stunning. It's all right to pursue the wrong pleasures and the right suffering. Here's my permission. Take it. It's all right to replace a siren with a bell. Your emergency should make its music. It's all right that the meter reader broke your sunflower in half. You knew better than to plant it where you did. Sometimes it's all right if you call your waiter honey when you order sweet tea. It's all right if you fall out of love with being alive, but rise again tomorrow with French pop songs and fresh croissants. Wear all your gold to church and try, really try, to believe anything but a stethoscope can hear your heart's urgency. It's all right that your mother died. So will your father and your son, but hopefully not before you. It's all right to lie naked in the rain and refuse to go inside, even when the moon tries to make your cold thighs shine. It's okay to lick the ice cream cake from your fingers. Do it now, in front of everyone. And if what falls on the children lining up their cars for the soapbox derby is not snow, but ash, that's all right. Celebrate the mutable body. And if you write notes to friends and senators in primary colors, that's fine. It's even okay to begrudge the stubborn pears in the wooden bowl. You're right, they're waiting to yellow until you turn away. It's all right that in the economy of forgiveness, you keep coming up one daffodil short. It's all right if you ask your heart to grow the size of secretariats, not because you want to outrun other horses or because your legs too are classic, but because you want to be buried whole after someone examines the insensible engine you left behind. I am of the beloved's name, no longer metronoming the valves, and places that slick fist in a stainless tray for weighing and shouts, "Sweet Jesus," before describing its ungodly heft with superlatives. Your heart, the most tireless, wildest, wiliest, thirstiest heat on record. And for my final poem, I'm just going to do something new. I also talked to Jessie Lee's class about, was I able or will to write during the pandemic, and so I thought maybe I'd end with something from that, and a non-bummery one in that category. So I'll do this one that has a loon in it for people in Wisconsin, because they'll get me. And the story in there is a story I really did hear about another bird murder that a loon did. Let's see, the only other thing that might be interesting or helpful to know is that an epithalamium is a poem of advice before a wedding. So the title of the poem is "I Want to Write an Epithalamium for Our Future." And thank you so much for showing up tonight. I'm really excited to hear Lauren read. And Mishka, thank you for the beautiful intro. And Connor, too, for organizing all of these events for people to participate in. I appreciate the intimacy poems offer us and the intimacy that these platforms are still able to offer us in the ways that we can, though I know we're all looking forward to sitting around tables and attending readings with people in the future. So to end, I want to write an epithalamium for our future. I do. I want to say it, but for years I made a labor of my sadness, a professional sorrow. But you're as bold as a New York pigeon, a joy with stamina. Your body, my midnight bullseye, a secret unfit for these blushing lines. And the future is unspoken and full of transplanted irises, each needing a year of rest before they bloom again. The shock of it, the forgetting, and then the soft purple blades rising to bruise the beds. I want to trust again, but my father is a burning mirror. He can say it now, love, but he also sleeps with cyanide under his pillow. He says it's a joke, but he also says he can't survive another divorce. Our hope is the eel's pharyngeal jaws, which is to say, doubled and tenacious. I took my time falling in love with what I am. You once celebrated my no, so I give you my curious yes, my what ifs no longer corseted by anxiety, but as sure as Da Vinci gluing raw silk to pine, his wings only waiting for the right wind. The home we make in each other is quiet enough to hear ghosts still troubling the attic. My father is made of loon stories, not all of which I should know, but he did tell me about an eagle he lifted from the lake, a clean hole where his heart should be, which means I could have kissed other mouths in other gardens, trembling like wisteria. I could still ask my father for the exit, let bitter almond season my sheets. Instead, my hand in yours, choosing your well-worn drum, your acrobatic heart steady in its holding, astounding in its aerial feast. The happiness finally possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Traci. That was fantastic. Now it's time for Lauren Russell. Lauren Russell is the author of 2 books, What's Hanging on the Hush, published by Azata Press in 2017, and most recently this year, Descent, out from Tarpaulin Sky Press and winner of the 2019 Tarpaulin Sky Book Award. She's a 2017 NEA Creative Writing Fellow in Poetry and the recipient of residencies and fellowships from Kabe Kanem, Vida, the Homeschool, City of Asylum, Pasaporta, the Malay Colony, and the Rose O'Neill Literary House. Lauren was also the 2014-2015 J.C. and Ruth Hall's Poetry Fellow at the University of Wisconsin Institute of Creative Writing. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day, Boundary 2, the Brooklyn Rail, Cream City Review, and the anthologies Bettering American Poetry 2015 and Furious Flower, Seeding the Future of African American Poetry, among others. She was the assistant director of the Center for African American and Poetry and Poetics at the University of Pittsburgh from 2016 to 2020. And she's currently an assistant professor at the Michigan State University Residential College in the Arts and Humanities, where she also directs their Poetry Center. And so Descent is a coming to terms with history and ancestry. In the year 2013, Lauren Russell acquired a copy of the diary of her great-great-grandfather, Robert Wallace Hubert, a captain in the Confederate Army. After his return from the Civil War, he fathered 20 children by 3 of his former slaves. One of those children was the poet's great-grandmother. Through several years of research, Russell would seek the words to fill the diary's omissions and imagine the voice of her great-great-grandmother, Peggy Hubert, a Black woman silenced by history. The result is a hybrid work of verse, prose, images, and documents that traverses centuries as the past bleeds into the present. Kenyon Review's Gita Kotari calls Descent both necessary and urgent. Kotari continues, I was struck by Russell's ability to create intimacy within the larger story of the Civil War and its legacy. I'm awed by the labor, writes Maya Marshall for Rhino. Quote, what was her willingness fed by, I wonder? Curiosity, propriety, future cultural capital, reclamation, assignation to one's right place, linkage to one's deeds and one's origin? Why this book? My answer, having read it, is American and simple. She wrote it to find herself, end quote. And so it's my absolute privilege to introduce Lauren Russell.
Thank you, Mishka. Yeah, thanks for the lovely introduction. It's such a privilege to get to read with Traci. I also wanted to thank Connor and Amy and everyone who's here, who's come out virtually to listen to poetry. I usually start with a long explanation of how I arrived at this project, but I feel like Mishka already did that. My great-great-grandfather's name was Robert Wallace Hubbard. As you just heard, he was a captain in the Confederate Army, and after the end of the Civil War, went back to East Texas and had children by 3 of his former slaves, who were also sisters. And one of them was my great-great-grandmother, Peggy Hubbard. And as I was typing up this 225-page diary that I acquired of Robert Hubbard, I became really interested in everything he was leaving out, which was the beginning of the descent of sort of digging into that space through research and writing over several years. Dear Robert, dear Redbeard, dear specter of the great white father, dear slaveholder, dear Confederate captain captured at Gettysburg, dear dispenser of land favor seaman, procreator of 20 children by 3 sisters simultaneously, dear father of the Negro League pitcher, dear farmer, schoolmaster, landlord, hired hand, grave paler, log roller, surveyor, and manure shoveler, dear singer, dear churchman and circus fan, dear reveler at brigade reunions, dear collector of sentimental poems about loneliness and redemption, dear pointy-eared like Lucifer and bearded beyond Rasputin, dear mythical Jim Crow defier, hero of my grandfather's childhood, who took him on the whites-only section of the streetcar he claimed this really happened, proclaiming, these are my grandchildren and they're sitting with me. Dear diarist, dear widower, dear lonesome hunger, dear admirer of well-formed women, dear inscrutable in the tintype beside your favorite half-claimed child, dear tallier of dates, debts, work days, weather conditions, neighbors by name and race, dear borer of wells, dear master of omission. Heard a whippoorwill holler this morning for the first time this spring. Heard a whippoorwill holler, all hands choking cotton. Heard a holler, a whimper. Heard a will whip her, will heard a whip. Whip or will heard, herding hers, whipping herds, sowing oats, whipping whores, stripping cane or whelped her, willed her, a well and a hold, dank of the dark of the hell of the hold. Choking cotton, cot in, a yoke and a pole, stripped and caned for. Heard her holler, caught her, held her hand to the whipped out your, held her head to the whipped out the billfold. Heard a whimper this spring, choke door, heard a holler, a hollowed out hold, whipped to a wheelbarrow, hell bent toward a hole, ripped from a wrapped in a gut wrench sugar hold. Question. So how did the women feel about this? Answer. Don't guess they had no say. So remember, my great-great-grandmother's name was Peggy. Peggy rises out of sleep through the dream called blue, where all her kinfolks are wading through fields of blue. Even her father left in Georgia, her stillborn brother somehow grown, her niece who stumbled into the fire on Christmas Day and died with the vision of her white dress aflame, the aunt or uncle who ran off or was lost forever to the auction block. They are all wearing blue, blue hats, blue shawls, and in the way they sing a song with no words deep from the gut, there is also blue. And bluely she creeps toward them in her calico blue. And now there is a dance, they are partnering for the quadrille, and the man they called Bo Peep cradles a banjo, strikes a tune blue. And her petticoats starched with hominy water, and Pris's too. And every time they stop moving for a second, the petticoats pop, and Pris giggles, and in Pris's eyes are flecks of blue. The log train shakes her into waking, black then dark blue, and she reaches for her kerchief blue, and she is stumbling toward the cradle blue and cooing shoo shoo to the baby who is hollering now. One Sunday, the preacher prayed, Lord, let us all go to heaven where there'll be no log train. Hoo, 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 and a clankety clank, whoos, black smoke curling into the half blue. Bob. Can I be your lazy eye, your wander, lust, your grave without a headstone, your bleeding gums, your buck teeth, and your walk bow-legged at the knee? Can I be your fortune hunter, your glimpse of wild geese, your red russet shoes that poison the feet? Reckon this is the best of my seed, been stripping cane and blind, robbing the bees. Reckon you've thought of swimming the creek. Last night they came on horseback, white hoods like phantoms, scanning the trees, burning torches, shattering sleep. I dragged the shotgun from the door and stepped, squinting, onto the porch. I want to think that when the witness tree leaned into the ledge, it heard her heart stop between one breath and the next. The day they buried Peggy, all the trees were whispering, the chinkapins and loblolly pines. Did she miscarry, bleed to death, while Bob or Plunk saddled the horse, rode miles panting after the doctor in town? Did she recall her mother's 20 pregnancies and bite her lips, her tongue the quilt, and finally the bedpost, lest her daughters hear her scream and come too close? Did she rage deliriously through the shakes, bloat from dropsy or hack through a consumptive fit? Or did she take her own life, swallow strychnine or arsenic, hang herself from a beam, clench a shotgun between her teeth. Peggy sometimes spoke in whispers. Sometimes she did not speak at all, but just said, uh-huh, leaning hard on the last syllable, or sure did, with all her weight on the first. Sometimes, if Bob looked closely, he would see a thought blow across her face. Once he might have tried to squeeze it out, but a woman is not sugarcane you can run through a mill, its secrets easily expelled. Peggy. Today I plucked a whippoorwill from down the bottom of the well. Her neck was broke, but still she hollered out her name. Get. The burst of freedom came in June. Go yonder way, I said. Once, when she was 16, Peggy finished cooking the hominy and drew pictures with ashes left on the hearth. When the Genographic Project says I am more Scandinavian than African, I don't know how to feel about it. If I went to Denmark in this skin, this smoking cyclone crown of frizz, and declared the findings, who would they convince? I'm told I am more Scandinavian than African, and wonder where this belongs in the half-built book I am no longer living in. Bob Hubbard was always gathering moss for the mud-cat chimneys he raised over Polk County. A county surveyor knew where lines bent. Did he leave behind a genetic map? Bob came through and made everybody kin, one of my cousins laughs. From Emma Haynes' History of Polk County, 1937. When the camp was established at Moscow, every house was closed and Negroes paraded up and down the streets. The next morning, 4 Negroes were found hanging to a tree. The Ku Klux Klan would control the Negroes and did to a great extent, but the citizens were kept in constant fear of a Negro uprising. Oh, that people loved peace rather than war. In the book I built, where I no longer live, some nights hummings in the walls, not wind hissing through chinks, but a human song that shifts in sleep and dips into a low diphthong. Peggy. That moon ain't hiding, clouds a shawl. Moon's cold as brass tacked upside a night's frock. Pin your tears to her, they'll sing like chimes, or ghosts that cry. Sometimes I feel I'm almost gone. Ghosts charred in dead men's lust. Think I'm some fool? Got brains of shucks? Since freedom I've been through the toughs. See, one moon casts your shadow twice, once toward the bottomland, once toward the pines. The wind's right smart, but moon, she's sly. Look, lightning bugs, they spark, but they cannot catch fire. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. That was incredible. I'd like to invite Traci back on screen for some Q&A. And for the people watching back at home, if you have any questions to ask both or either of the authors, please use the question tool at the bottom of the Crowdcast page to submit your query, and we'll do our best to get them. I think I'll start us off with a question for the both of you. Both of your fantastic collections deal so much with memory and with the afterlife of events from the distant and the recent past, spooling its way into the present. Could you speak more on that relationship that memory has with your work? When did the telling matter than what was being told? Did it, or vice versa? So.
That's actually, and at Lauren's reading, beautiful reading, and the question kind of actually makes me think about my last book, Sadagi, and about my mom's childhood in Brazil, which I used to think she just was a really bad storyteller. And now I recognize the way trauma and PTSD can affect memory. And I realized she probably just couldn't say some of the stuff, or couldn't recall lots of moments. And she did just have like lots of gaps in her memory of her own childhood. So I think sometimes I was writing, I don't get to say why Lauren was, but like trying to give voice to the voiceless part, or give life to, or imagine a thing that is left out of, the narratives I received, and try and imagine my way into that space, and try and understand a little bit more of what that was like.
Yeah, I think that exactly speaks to what I was trying to do also, Traci, in that my great-great-grandmother Peggy was only mentioned 4 or 5 times in Bob Hubbard's 225 pages of diaries. And other than that is only mention, she appears on the 1870 and 1880 censuses, and that's it. So that's as far as she exists in the historical record. And so I was trying to imagine into that space. Norbessie Phillip and probably others talk a lot about how history is one-sided, because it's sort of controlled by the people in power. The archive is created by people in power. And so sort of part of the job of poets, I think, is to sort of to use imagination to get into those spaces that history sort of cannot get into, because those records haven't been allowed to exist, or haven't been allowed to be created, or to be retained. But it gets into interesting questions about memory, because my grandfather had told me, and my grandfather is no longer alive, but he sort of talked about Hubbard like almost this hero, as it turns out in the first poem, who took him on the white-only section of the streetcar. And as I was digging into doing all this research, I found out that he was a much more complicated figure, and much more problematic in certain ways, but it became really interesting about why my grandfather wanted to remember him this way. And it's not like both of those can't exist, like both of those, Hubbard, the former slaveholder, can exist alongside the Hubbard who took his Black grandchildren on the streetcar. So
it's striking me too that I was talking also with Jessie Lee's class too about so some of the lullabies in my book were just like desperate, 45 minutes or an hour I could have away from my child to try and write something and make something in a time where it felt like I couldn't make anything. And I know, in the hardest griefs of my life, I tried to just stake out something. I wanted to be able to remember what that time was, even if it was bad. It didn't matter if it was a bad poem but the love poem that I started with was what I wrote at the end of that worst period of my life, and was secretly an elegy. And same thing with the pandemic too. I don't care if it's a bad poem. I'm just trying so hard to make sure I'm writing something so that I don't forget, so that a record does exist, even if it's just a personal one. So I'm trying to make memories sometime too, with writing, just to make sure that, especially the times that are the hardest to write, sometimes it's the most important to me. Often it's not my best work, but I really want it to be, I want to be able to remember what certain things felt like.
Yeah, thank you. I think also just building off of this idea, right, of writing everything down, finding that one space in the day to write everything down and preserve that memory. I'm also curious, how is the pandemic, and I'm sure this is a very timely question, but how has the pandemic affected your writing? So the health crisis has affected everyone in our own daily lives, but have you had a particular practice that the pandemic's interrupted or changed, or even created an opportunity for? I know the both of you are teachers, and so there's also figuring that in with the writing. So I'd like to know how's the writing been going?
I don't know who wants to answer. I haven't been writing very much, so I'm interested in how Traci's going to answer.
And I am teaching, and so I write alongside my students, and I do a lot of the same prompts. And my class was all about the body, a lot of pain, a lot of trauma, because I picked my book list before March. Oops. So what we've done instead is we change our name in the Zoom call to the last thing that brought it. And we did a whole section on joy. I like cobbled together all sorts of good joy poems. And fortunately, a lot of them were like list poems too. So our last unit has been on joy, and trying to make, and people are writing really beautiful joy poems and list poems. Because I found that that's actually been kind of a okay way to work for me, is like looking for something. One of my pandemic practices is either to write a thank you every day to somebody, especially somebody maybe I forgot to thank. My son's teacher gets a lot of thank yous. Or to write down a list of gratitudes, so that like I keep trying to focus on the better parts or the good parts. Because I also do think, I'm like, there's going to be a time. Right now I'm so ready for my kid to go back to school, but there will also be time I'll like miss things. I've gotten great insights to how he's learning, and I've gotten great memories from this time, butterflies, and we've done all these things. And so writing alongside my students is helping. And I still meet with my my writing group. We still just meet via Zoom. And I think if it was for myself, I would forget to do it all the time. But because somebody's going to be there on the other end of that call, I force myself to get something out for us to talk about. And they're so wonderful and insightful, and they ask such good questions. And we've been writing together for so long that it's more of a conversation than like a workshop feeling. And it always gets me to something else good that I want to keep digging into. So yeah, just an accountability buddy. And for my writing class, we've just been making a lot of list poems of gratitude and of joy.
I haven't, like I said, I haven't been writing very much. I find it really, really hard to concentrate. And even if I like set time when I'm supposed to be writing, I don't. About the only way I've been writing anything at all. We had a workshop at the Michigan State University, the Arca Center for Poetry that I direct. We did this really fantastic event a couple weeks ago called Neurodivergent Poetics for Non-Speaking Autistic Poets Reinvent Language. And one of the featured poets was Adam Wolfund. And he and the poet Chris Martin did, they called it a workship, not a workshop. That was kind of the theme. They did a workship with my class and some other people who came on Zoom. And the exercise they came up with was that we would all take like recycled language, like from your old terrible poems or whatever, and put it into the chat. And then you would take language out of the chat and use it in your own work. And I found that really exciting. I feel like the only ways I've been able to write at all are in doing some sort of weird collaborative game or something like that. And I'm hoping that some of those things I'll be able to retain and like use some of the stuff that came out of it. But right now I've sort of given up on like creating any kind of shape out of this stuff. And maybe that will come at a later point.
Yeah, thank you. I think, yeah, it's also important, I think, to recognize that there can be delight and play in writing. Lauren, I remember when you had a reading here, I think like 2 years ago, you had a 12-sided die.
Yeah.
Throw on the floor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Another question. So like in the spirit of bringing you two together, well, virtually, while we can, back to Madison, I'd love to hear about your experiences in the program as fellows. Madison's actually very present. For the folks at home, Madison is very present in dissent. And I'm curious also if its footprints are in Come the Slumberless to the Land of Nod. So were there ideas, practices, viewpoints, projects that were either, like born, transformed, refined, or even like disposed of, while during your time in Wisconsin? Love to hear about that.
Well, that one's an easy one for me because I don't think this book would exist without the fellowship. Like I wrote probably half of the draft during that 1 year because it really gave me time to write that I've not had in the same way since. And it's really where I had transcribed the diary the year before that and came in with this project in my mind. But I really wouldn't have known how to get my footing in it if it weren't for Ahmad Jamal Johnson. Very early in the fellowship year, we all had to give presentations about works in progress. And I was just starting this and I had written what's now the intro But I was really lost, and I sort of said, like, I'll start reading about the Civil War, and then I'll start reading about the Negro Leagues and forget everything I just read about the Civil War. And he gave me this really wonderful advice, which is to keep 3 notebooks, one for diction, one for images, and one for narrative facts. And I did that throughout the entire process. So I kept track of my research, and I wrote anytime I was writing, anytime I was reading, and anytime I was writing, I would just have them all open and write across it. So I am extremely grateful to Ahmad for giving me a way into this work. And yes, Madison does turn up a lot in the book in some ways that aren't flattering to it, but it was part of the present, the meaning of the present and the past in terms of our the way we're continuing to reckon with race in this country and with the legacy of slavery.
Yeah, and come the Slumberless, we mentioned ahead of time that I was there 2008 to 2009. So come the Slumberless doesn't really have any Madison tracks, though I go to Wisconsin every single year because it's not really where my family's from, but they have a place there, and my family moved every 3 to 4 years. So it's the one place I feel like is home or that I belong, or up until recently, it still had its very orange 60s carpet too. So it just didn't change for a long time and was like, it's sort of my home, I feel like, in Wisconsin. But my first book, Rookery, was definitely, that was the title of my MFA thesis, but it was the book that I mostly finished in Wisconsin, and started my second book in Wisconsin when I went on a creativity date with myself to the art museum there. And saw something that sort of was an accidental date with the next book, and I started working on that. But so I guess I like using these romantic metaphors, which I've already used with my one night stand poems. So I started writing a second book in Wisconsin, and I could tell that like the voice was different. But the thing that worked for me, because I know there are at least some other people in the audience who are, working on their MFA thesis and are thinking about it as like the beginnings of a book, or hopefully the book. And I'll say that one of the things that helped me is I would put all of the poems on the floor, and then I picked fights with them, like when you want a relationship to be over and maybe you pick the fight, like trying to push someone away, be like, look, we're so different. So I wrote breakup poems to each section, and it ended up being kind of longer poems where I just be like, oh, I'm tired of writing about this stupid thing, and like, ah. And like, so I just write the breakup poem and just have it out, have the big fight with each obsession. And I just put those longer poems at the end of each section, and that kind of worked organizationally for me. So I do think, when you're ready to break up with your project or your book, I think writing the breakup poem or poems can be helpful, or writing the poem that doesn't belong. And for me, writing the poem that doesn't belong is part of what I was like, okay, look, I'm ready to move on. Just like, stop texting, give me your keys back, we're done. So like sometimes writing the poem that doesn't work, I've heard other people say that's the one that does need to go into a book, because that can be a good counterpoint. But something about, just signing up for your creative Tinder account and just seeing what else is out there, right? Like exploring, writing the poem that doesn't fit, and seeing if that maybe belongs in this book or is helping you move on to the next thing. So that's one of the things I got from my time in Wisconsin that I feel like is maybe hopefully practical advice for anybody looking to break up with a book or a person. That stuff works too, but it's not the most healthy way about it.
Thank you. We've got a question from the audience for Lauren specifically. Question for the audience: can we see what some of the poems on in Descent look like on the page?
Sure. Did they ask for any in particular?
Not necessarily. The question is just, can we just see what some poems in Descent look like on the page? It's a very hybrid work.
I don't know how well you can see. You see. That's the opening poem. There's a lot of stuff. There's also like a lot of documents in here. So that's a prisoner of war record. This is a substitution poem that I didn't read this one, but it was with the Juneteenth proclamation. I'm trying to see if any of them, this one was made, I also didn't read this one, but this one was, the form is from this reburial program. It's a very long story. Hubbard's remains were reburied by the Sons of Confederate Veterans about 20 years ago. This one I just read this. This is an erasure of Emma Haynes' History of Polk County with chalk. You might have to get it to see the rest.
Yeah, so like, yeah, to the folks back home, please purchase a copy of Lawrence and Traci's books. We have a list of partnering independent bookstores who we'd love for you to get those books from. Another question from the audience. Oh yeah, thank you, Lauren, for showing the book. Question for both authors. Yeah, from the audience. This audience member writes, as a writer, I struggle to really express to my readers some of the heavy traumas I have endured. Do you have any personal advice on how you encountered, approached, grasped your own unique experiences, and how they were expressed in your work? Once you write about your content and readers read your work, did your perception shift on what you were holding back on, or was that challenging to write within your work? Very long, complex sentence. But yeah.
I feel like I got lost. I'm sorry.
So I think essentially they're asking like, how did you write these experiences into your work, and was there like a change that happened once that work was out into the world, right? So like once you wrote about this content and readers read your work, did your perception shift on what you were holding back on, or was challenging to write within your work? So it's a two-part question. One is like, how do you have any personal advice on how you grasp your own unique experiences, and did that change, or did any perceptions change once that work was out into the world?
I mean, I know, okay, gosh, that's a lot. Because I mean, with trauma, that's a lot, and how to write about trauma is big. And also not all writing with and about trauma maybe necessarily goes to a reader. I think sometimes that is just for us. And thinking about, because I do think about, even though no one reads poetry, that it's still out there and it's still a way. I always feel like people are getting intimate with me, but I'm not in the room, and it's really weird, but I have to be really careful with the reader. So if it's something that I make public, I have to make sure that the way I wrote it loves the person on the other end of it. Because I think some writing about trauma for me can just be angry and ugly, and it's a way that I need to get it out. And it is really important to be seen maybe in all ways that we're processing. But I think if part of my speech is going to be public and be out there with people that there's no chance for me to correct what I've said or to be gentle in another way, I guess I do hope that my poems don't hurt people, or do, if I do go to a dark place, can restore somebody to themselves at the end. So I do, I think not all of my writing necessarily is for everybody to read, and that's part of it. And usually with the most difficult things, I usually try and write it more than once or in different ways. In graduate school, I had a friend create a fake email account, and she would send me different prompts based on, so the first section of my first book is actually mostly from her prompts of like, okay, now go in and write it from the other person's point of view. Okay, now write it as a series of questions. Okay, now this. And so she just kept pushing and pushing, and this is why she had a fake email account, so I could get mad at a fake person, to just like keep entering. And in this newest book too, like I wrote tons of failed poems, and I just tried to put it in every single received form, the same language in every different received form I could think of, and none of them worked. But it was partly just like approach many different times, try many different things, and just engage with it. And I think I've heard that each time we touch a memory, we change it somehow anyway. And certainly writing it, I think, changes it, and it becomes more of a way too, that it becomes more permanent in that way. And I think it certainly changes my relationship to the content. I think hopefully for the better. I think because if I do let what become public hopefully have some kind of love in it for whoever's reading it, then hopefully the way I can hang on to things like memories of my mother or other past things that were hurtful, that there's still hanging on to the positive, or doing it as an act of love or of sharing in that. And I think, yeah, what I think is what I'm holding back or what challenges me also just changes all the time anyway too. Because I think we as people change a bit. But that's my that's a lot to know, and there's a lot of traumas out there that people might be engaging in, but I guess those are just some of my thoughts on how to handle that and what maybe that could look like.
I feel like I didn't, I sort of evaded this in the Madison question, but a lot of this, so there are also essays in the book, and there's a sort of narrative arc of essays that's happening throughout. The poems are, it's among the poems, right? And the essays are mostly during the period I was in Madison, and one of them I wrote after the murder of Tony Robinson, the unarmed Black teenager who was killed by a Madison police officer, and how Madison really changed my relationship to race because it's extremely white. It's extremely white, and there's sort of a politics I wasn't used to, and I sort of discovered that, I mean, I'm a mixed race person who, for a lot of my life, I lived in metropolises, and I could be the sort of ethnically ambiguous brown person. And I actually wrote in the book in Madison, I have become Black. And it's actually changed how I experience the world and how I experience race. And I felt like there was a lot of, and sort of dealing with my own internalized racism, which is also part of the dissent and part of the legacy of slavery and the aftermath of slavery. And that was very painful, but while I was writing it, I wasn't thinking about audience at all, or I wouldn't have written it. And in a way, a lot of the stuff I'm imagining is painful to imagine. But somehow when it, like after it, by the time it comes into the world, I've been living with it for so long that like how other people receive, it's not like exactly it doesn't matter, but it's, I don't know that it fundamentally changes for me because the real experience was in the process of writing it. And I'm a person who really thinks in writing. So so whatever happens after that is like extra, like the change for me happened through the experience of living with it and writing with it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot to like wrestle with too, right? Like writing and writing in general, but also like writing out to the world and writing to yourself. Yeah, it's a lot to grapple with. But thank you for sharing your insight on that, and your insight on memory and the creative process and coping with the pandemic. And those are all the questions we have from the audience. And so on behalf of UW-Madison's program in creative writing and the Wisconsin Book Festival, I'd like to thank Traci Brimhall and Lauren Russell for gracing us with their virtual presence and sharing their masterful work and writerly insight with us. And I'd like to thank all of you for making the long drive to your computer or tablet to be here tonight. Please get back home safe. We are joined by like 12 folks from 12 other states, 3 other countries. And so thank you to all of you at home. And if any of you would like to purchase Traci and Lauren's books, please support a local independent bookseller and place orders through our partnering stores. You can find a full list of them and their contact info at our webpage, tinyurl.com/whiskweds. And we hope you can all join us at our next event featuring Amy Nezuko-Matatil on Wednesday, November 11. You can RSVP on Crowdcast and stream the event there on the date itself. You can also access a full list of our events at our webpage or by subscribing to our email list. And so once more, thank you for logging on, and thank you so much, Traci and Lauren, for reading tonight. Thank you to Connor Moran for manning tech. I'm Mishka Ligot with the UW-Madison program in creative writing and the Wisconsin Book Festival. Folks at home, take care. Please stay home. Please wear a mask. Please wash your hands. Hang in there, and we hope to see you all at the next Wisconsin Wednesday. Good night.
Thank you.